Hey, what's good, family? Elder Rod here, also known as the Preacher's Kid, welcoming you to the inaugural episode of the Dear Preacher's Kid podcast. We will be talking about all things God, church, religion, life, and anything else that comes on. So excited to have you all with us today for our very first episode and for my guest. It's a little bit difficult to introduce someone who you've known all of their lives, but our relationship goes back some 42 years to the day my parents brought him home from the hospital. And I'm very proud of the man that he's come, knew that the hand of the Lord was on his life at an early age, ordained to preach while in high school. Youth pastored some of the major ministries here, both locally, down in Atlanta, and is now serving as the senior pastor of the Mount Olive Church here in Joliet, Illinois. A thriving ministry here in the city that is growing by leaps and bounds, and I'm so absolutely thrilled to have him here with us on our very first episode of the Dear Preacher's Kid podcast. So will you help me welcome my little brother, Pastor Wendell Martin? I feel like we should have some hand claps or something, but oh well. So welcome, bro.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm excited about this podcast, excited to share with you all and see what Rodney has cooking up. Let's get in.
Let's do it now. I need you to behave.
Listen,
I'm just saying.
I cannot make any promises.
I am just saying. We are
behaving.
not in the basement of your house. People are watching.
Listen, everybody that knows me knows who I am, and I am going to be authentically me.
This is what we've got to deal with today.
I am going to be authentically me, no matter where I'm at, whether I'm at church, whether I'm in a podcast studio. So you just got to take what you can get. It is what it is.
You got to know us. You got to know our family to know this is pretty much the norm. We've been doing this since we were little boys, and now we're grown men with a lot more age behind our names, probably not much more sense, truth be told. So
that's debatable.
Well, I'm just saying. All right, so let's hop on in. So some of these questions is going to be a little bit difficult to ask, but I'm curious, not difficult. Some of the answers I feel like I know because we grew up in the same house. But there's always something for different experiences, even if you're in the same house. So my experiences may not have been yours. So I'm just curious. Let's hop right on into it. Growing up in the Martin house.
Here we go. Here we are.
What was that like?
I mean, in my opinion, I don't think it was good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, for me, my experience was great because I have no other experience to compare it to. I've never lived in anyone else's household other than my own personal household. So, for me, our childhood when it comes to living in our home with our parents, our dad and our mom, and with each other, it was just the norm to me. I didn't know anything different. So I thought all was well and that our house was normal and that, that's the way everybody functioned. Church and God, was central to our family. So I just, for me, that's just who we were. And that's what we did. And I guess you don't start thinking about a lot of that stuff until you get older. I know for me, when I don't even think it was marriage that did it for me, but I think it was more so when Shara and I started having kids and start thinking about like how we wanted to raise our family,
right.
And kind of just comparing that to how I was raised, and she's comparing that to how she was raised, and the more we have discussions, I think that's when I start recognizing that, our reality, it's probably not everybody's reality, but I didn't see anything necessarily negative with our reality. Yeah.
I think for me, and to put a little bit in perspective, when Dad started pastoring St. Paul, I was 6, 7, somewhere in that age. So I had the lens. So I was about 6 or 7. So I had the lens of being at another church, even though it was for a short period of time. I had the lens of being at another church where I was not the pastor's son. We were at Prayer Tower. And then when Dad started pastoring St. Paul, like literally when Dad took on that church, you were a newborn. You were like 2 or 3 months old. So the norm of growing up in a family where your dad is a pastor is all you know. Realistically,
Absolutely.
like you don't know life outside of being Pastor Edward Martin's son, because that's what you were really born into. And so for me, like normalcy, definitely normal. I think it wasn't until college and I started to meet other people who had experiences outside of our norm that I was like, wow, people live like this? Like Sundays when I was in my dorm room and I'm driving my little green Tempo back up 94 to get to St. Paul so I could direct the choir, and I'm seeing all these kids going to the atrium and kicking it on Sunday. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
People don't go to church on Sunday? Like, that was so normal to us that I think we looked at anything that didn't kind of happen in that bubble as abnormal. And so for me, it was like, yeah, like people ask me, like, what was it like being the son of a preacher? And I'm like you said, I don't know anything else. Well, I know a little bit more now, but I didn't know anything else back at then. So it was pretty normal for me. So
Well, you don't know anything else now because you're still a son of a preacher.
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
it's not like, Dad ever stopped being a preacher. He retired from pastoring in 2018.
He ain't retired from pastoring.
Well,
Daddy pastors the neighborhood now.
I mean, but
he don't
as far
pastor the church no more, but he pastors the neighborhood.
Yeah, so our reality has changed because we've grown up.
Yeah,
and we've matured, and I think that a lot of that is just, being raised in your parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
No matter whether they're a pastor or preacher, whatever the case may be, being raised in your parents' house, that's only going to be for a season. Anyway.
Yeah.
But you still have to, no matter whether you were raised in a house with a pastor, a preacher, or a pimp, a pimp or a prostitute,
or a combination of the both.
Pastor, preacher, pimp, prostitute, whatever the case.
Saints and undecided. Huh?
It's just a matter of that's. Of course, formative years, but at the same time, I think it's up to all of us to make some decisions about the type of life we want to live or we want to lead. So that's all.
Do you think our life was balanced? And I say that from the perspective of, like, we know our normalcy was church. I remember when I got my first job at Fitzer's. Shout out to Fitzer's. Everybody in the Martin family worked at Fitzer's at one point.
I didn't work at Fitzer's Frosties.
You didn't work at Fitzer's.
I did not work at Fitzer's Frosty right there on Manhattan Road in
saying,
Joliet.
We all came through there. We were a staple. The Martins were a staple at Fitzer's.
But chili cheese fries and a strawberry
give me a poor boy with mozzarella cheese and some
Jr.
grilled onions.
Fitzerburger or Fitzer Jr. Okay,
ain't that all right?
All right. Anyway, all right.
Okay, so I remember when I first got my job at Fitzer's and I was working there after school like 2 or 3 days a week. Mama drove down. Mama drove down to Fitzer's to pick me up from work my first day. And she walks up and tells the owners, "Now I'm just telling you now, he don't work on Sundays." And I guess for me, like, that was just the norm. Like, nothing else occurred on Sundays. We didn't go to work on Sundays, and when we did get jobs, it was just understood that Sundays was like off limits. But I think we live in a different world now where there's not necessarily the reality of people giving up everything else they do in life for church. So would you say our childhood, I got my thoughts on it, but would you say we had a balanced childhood?
I would say yeah. Because the reason I would say yes is because, and I can only speak for me, and it was our reality. I mean, we played basketball. We were on the basketball team. We still were allowed to do those things that we naturally gravitated toward. So, like, for me as a kid, that was basketball, and then being that Nate and I, are so close in age, we were both on the basketball team. We both had paper routes, and we all did that whole thing.
Yeah, I took my paper route.
Yeah, we took your paper route
at Fitz's. I didn't want to deliver papers.
Once you got a legit job, if that's ever.
I'm just saying.
But I think our life So balance to me is subjective.
Okay.
And I think that it just really depends on what is a priority to you.
Yeah.
Like I think about like my friends who I grew up with, who were on the basketball team and things of that sort, who I hung out with, that did not go to church.
Right,
But
right.
that was because their parents did not go to
Parents didn't
church.
go,
They
right.
weren't raised like that. So I didn't think anything different of it. For me, church was the place where, in many cases, I gained my social worth.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
didn't feel like our life was imbalanced. Again, I didn't know anything else.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and
To
the
compare
other
to,
piece is, what else do we have to do? I mean,
'cause we couldn't.
well,
I mean,
whether you could or not, the bottom line is, as a and I'll take it more to middle school and high school
Okay.
type, but like as middle school students going into high school and then high school students, sometimes I ask the question like, what else was there to do? Because I mean, there was plenty to
Yeah,
do, but
yeah.
as far as balance is concerned, I see balance as engaging in activities that are going to be enriching.
Okay.
So
Okay.
for me, church was enriching. Church is
Absolutely.
where I learned how to be a public speaker. Church is where I learned how to manage business finances. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
read my first profit and loss statement in a church meeting. Like, think about it. As kids, we grew up understanding profit and loss sheets. We were looking at balance sheets and P&Ls as kids
I
at the
was
church
typing
meeting.
daddy's church correspondence letters on a
Yeah,
typewriter at
I
11.
mean, think about it. As kids, we knew Robert's Rules of Order.
Yeah,
We knew how to
yeah.
conduct a meeting. We knew how to raise a motion. We knew how to carry a motion. We knew how to. Are you ready for the question? All in
Question.
favor say aye.
Any
Nay-
opposed?
Nays and ayes have it. Yeah. So, I mean, we knew how to do all these things. And so I guess I look at it from the perspective of someone who is a full-time pastor now, who is raising my family in church.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, probably my daughter more than any of the kids has more balance.
Okay.
My boys don't have as much balance because they have a very slim,
window of opportunity.
well, not slim window. It's just that their interests.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
so and we've been intentional about like exposure. Like, the boys did jujitsu. They've done baseball. They've done soccer. Ava is doing softball. She's in theater. She's in dance. With all of those things, they still are at church.
They're still at church. Yeah.
It's a matter. I think for us growing up, it wasn't a matter that our life was imbalanced, but we didn't have a lot of interest outside of church.
Yeah,
Even as kids, because I'm pretty sure, like, if we had said to dad and mom that we were interested, like my boys are, like Austin always expresses interest, like he's fascinated with video animation. He's fascinated with anything like engineering and anything that's technical. He's fascinated with like gaming and building out different games and Roblox and all of this stuff, but he knows how to code. Like, I'm not into that stuff. I'm not into coding. Like, none of that makes sense to me.
What's that?
I'm in the church. but I think about like my son, he has another avenue or something else that he's interested in.
Right.
And I think the key for us is, I don't think mom and dad always knew how to help us in an area that they weren't familiar with.
Yeah.
So like,
absolutely.
I struggle to and I listen to my son, and when he's talking about like the different game rooms and stuff like that he's created and the coding that he's doing, and not that I'm not I want to be interested in what he's doing, but like, it's outside of my world. So I think for dad and mom, it's different. And I know for me, I have that time because pastoring is my full-time job. And dad was bivocational, a lot of those years. So working full-time and then pastoring pretty much full-time. And then, I mean, in all respects, like, he was the one that took us to all our games. He was the one that
definitely present.
He was very present. He's the one that, even when we had our paper routes, remember Sunday mornings was crazy because
whose route was it? Was it our route or was it his route?
That's the thing. Sunday morning was crazy because like anybody know anything about being a paper boy? I used to say I was an independent newspaper consultant. I wasn't a paper boy. Independent newspaper consultant. But I think about like Dad would get up before all of us would get up on Sunday mornings.
Get them papers.
And after preparing his sermon or finishing preparing his sermons, he would pull the papers in.
And help us wrap papers.
Help us wrap the papers, put them in the back of his car, drive us on our paper routes, and then we would come home and get ready for Sunday school. So I think, to go back to your question, was it balance? I think the balance was a balance between a good work ethic and church.
Absolutely.
That was the balance. But it wasn't like we weren't well-rounded culturally.
Right.
Church was our culture.
Church was our culture, but we did have opportunities to pursue stuff. And even when I think about other PKs we grew up with that couldn't do nothing.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we could do some stuff. We couldn't do a lot of stuff, but the little stuff we would do, we were able to do. Like, I ran track. I was, I did sneak to the dance once. Sorry, Mom.
Sneak to the dance?
To the 8th grade dance, dude.
You had to sneak to the 8th grade dance?
Because, let me tell you how bad it was. When I would see you and Nate and Michael got the watered down version of Mom and Dad.
Oh yeah, you were the practice run.
Me and Anthony got the fresh out the pot. They got the fresh out the oven with the butter glistening on them. They was fresh parents then. So I remember it was 6th grade and Laraway was having a Valentine's Day dance in the gym. And I asked, I think I asked Daddy, could I go to the dance? He said, dance? What you gonna be doing at a dance? He's good for answering your question with a question. What you gonna be doing at a dance? And I'm like, what do we do? You dancing now? So that was the end of that. So what I had to do was go and tell Mama it was an ice cream social after school and ask her, could I go?
So you lied?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
I hope y'all see this, Dad.
I did. Look, I was 11 years old. I'm way past 11.
You're lying. The truth ain't
not gonna whoop me.
What's your name, Demon? Liar. So identify yourself, Demon. Liar.
I went right to the doggone thing. I went right to the dance.
But when you think about it though, and the other pieces, so for me, like I try in these cases, I try to understand the why behind what people do.
Yeah.
I try to understand the why behind why people I try to understand the why behind the way people are.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about Dad and Mom in that conversation, like that why, like when you start asking the question of why they raised us the way they raised us, like even to think about the difference between the way they were with you and Anthony versus the way they were with Nate and I, Dad and Mom.
And we not even talk about Mike because
we not gonna talk about Mike. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
That's a podcast.
That's a podcast on its own.
Podcast on the youngest child. But I guess I think about it like this, like, and I understand it now as a new pastor. When Dad started pastoring in Mount Olive in 1982, I said Mount Olive, St. Paul. Yeah, I would say my church.
Your church.
St. Paul in 1982, like you were 6 years old. Anthony was like what?
Anthony was like 13 or 14.
13 or 14. Yeah. So when you think about that, like you have a elementary school kid. And you have a high schooler, one going into high school.
Yeah.
And that's that age when your kids start cutting it up for real.
Yeah.
And as a pastor, you feel this pressure to kind of make your kids look and act a certain way.
Okay.
Because during that time, it was all about being the picture perfect.
Appearances, yep.
Parents. It was more about appearances because, Black church was the place where many African Americans gained their social worth.
Right, right.
So like if I wasn't anybody on my job, if I felt like I wasn't anybody in the community, I can go to the church,
Go to church and get a
I
position.
can get a position. I can be the president,
Yeah.
I can be the chairman, I can be the pastor, I can be the assistant pastor. Like even if I was at the bottom of the totem pole on my job, I can come to church and be recognized, to be esteemed.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that had a lot to do with why our parents raised us the way they were.
Mhm.
I believe it was that pressure, that cultural pressure.
Oh God, yeah.
For you to
Yeah.
present this picture perfect image. Like I think about even pressure when I first started pastoring, like I used to be on my kids, hey, sit up, don't do this, don't do that, don't run, because I felt like there was a pressure where eyes were always on my children.
Yes,
And then you
yes.
get to a point where you start not caring no more.
I am officially at that point. I'm grown now, and Daddy is retired. I do not care.
Well, I'm gonna say this. I think that the older we've gotten, I think as we've gotten older, I think our parents have gotten freer.
Oh God, yeah.
But I think more so free from free from religious legalism. That's more so what the freedom came from, religious legalism, because
the daddy we got now is not the daddy who raised us. And that's the honest to God truth. Like Dad is so chill now.
Do you do you appreciate it? Don't you
I
appreciate
it? Dad
because
is
the other
so
key
chill
is,
now.
Think about how we act when we're all together. Like we cut up. And like we we cut a food when we're together, and I think about like if Dad and Mom had been as liberal with us as they are chill now, when we were growing up,
we wouldn't know,
man, if they had given us that inch, we would have taken a few miles.
You know, Daddy was the getting in the car and chasing us around the neighborhood where we were supposed to be type.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you also think about, and I don't want to throw no shade in them, but like when you think about like the stuff that we got in trouble for as middle schoolers, as high schoolers, versus the stuff some other preachers' kids got in trouble for. Like, man, I take my trouble. I take my trouble.
We were supposed to be in McDonald's and we was at Burger King. That's about the extent of our transgressions.
Like, I'll take that trouble all day long. And I guess now, just looking at life and how things have kind of panned out, I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the fact that they were strict. I'm grateful for, all the yelling and the screaming. I remember one time, and this is what's crazy, and you probably remember this. I was 16. I had that 1995 green Mitsubishi Eclipse. With old Wendell 1 on the license plate. All right. So I had a 1995 Mitsubishi Eclipse, and we had a half a day of school one day. We got out early. So this is towards the end of my junior year in high school. I had gotten my car, like, I started driving on my birthday. So I had my car a little bit before that. So when I got my license, Dad was giving freedom.
Give a little freedom.
And we had a half a day of school. And I remember Lazar Gray. Rest in peace, Lazar Gray.
Oh, Lazar.
Man, love that brother.
Man.
Lazar Gray and Jamal Williams. They hit me up when they knew I had a half a day, and I had a little cell phone for the first little old school Nokia. Man, they hit me up like, hey, man, y'all got to have a day, right? And they're like, yeah, let's ride. Lazar said, let's go to Lamex. So I go to Preston Heights, and I pick up Lazar, and then I go to the Hill, pick up Jamal, and we go to Lamex, the Mexican restaurant on Essington and Jefferson. Get down there having lunch. We in there loud, cutting up. It's a half a day of school. Dad and Mom didn't know I had a half a day of school. So then they have the brilliant idea, man, let's roll up to Guitar Center. Now, at that time, the closest Guitar Center was Arlington Heights.
You drove to Arlington Heights?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you had that one coming.
355. So I'm 16.
Whatever, you had that one coming.
Lazar in the front seat. And he really in the back seat.
In the front and the
He
back.
leaning all the way back. And then Jamal got his legs across the
Because it wasn't but a 2-seater.
it was a small seat in the back. But anyway, we drove all the way up 355 and went there. And I mean, we got in Guitar Center and we were going to town. I'm talking about, and I just happened to look up and realize like we had been there for like 5 hours.
Wow.
And I'm up at Mount Vernon. And well, not Mount Vernon, Arlington Heights, wherever it is up north.
You were an hour away from the house with no traffic.
With no traffic. So I'm getting traffic in rush hour. And I get home, and it's probably 5, 6 o'clock by now, and Dad is pacing back and forth all over the house. Now, in my mind, it wasn't that big of a deal because I was with some church boys. I was with church kids. We was all hanging out. We was in, like, it ain't like we was out with a bunch of girls. It ain't like we were selling drugs. It ain't like we were doing anything illegal. We were at the Guitar Center playing church music. And I remember Dad went off on me so bad. And I was so upset. He was like, I'll take your car and park it out in that backyard underneath that tree.
I think he took all our cars at one point.
Man, he was livid. And what's funny is like that next week, we had saw Jamal and Lazar were at church. And Lazar went to Dad and apologized. And he was like, man, I'm sorry. Like I didn't even think about it. Like, because you got to think about it. I was 16.
You were 16, yeah.
Jamal was like 20.
Yeah.
21.
You were definitely
Lazar,
the youngest one.
Yeah, Lazar was like 2 years older than that,
so he's like 23, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I remember Lazar pulling Daddy over to the side at church. After he apologized, he said, but I do want to tell you this, Pastor. Like, you know me, and you know I love you, and I respect you. And he said, I would never do anything or put your son in a position that will cause him. He says, I make Wendell go home before I involve him in some stuff. And I think for Dad, that might have been one of the few times, not only did he recognize the impact that he had on his own kids, but he also recognized the impact that he had on so many other like young men in our community, wherein like a lot of stuff people wouldn't include us on because they didn't want it,
because they respected Dad.
Because they respected Dad. So like when I think about it in the grand scheme of things, I'm like, whoa, like the way Dad rocked out.
He didn't play that. I got the same whooping. That's ironic because I remember this. We were when Maceo had first started Voices of Praise.
Now look, you doing a podcast, so everybody don't know who Maceo is.
Okay,
so you got to give full context.
So Joliet, Illinois. I was 15 years old. Maceo Harris was a local choir director in the city who started a community choir with like 15 kids. Most of them went to Central. So these were all my classmates he built this choir with. And Maceo, for those who don't know, Maceo Harris is the genius who wrote Every Knee Shall Bow that Ricky Dillard sang. V.O.P. was singing that song before New G ever got a hold of it. So you're talking about
V.O.P. is Voices of Praise.
1991, 92. So I'm 15 years old, and we're traveling all over the city of Chicago every weekend singing somewhere. And we sang at the old Monument of Faith on the South Side. This is back when Apostle Richard Hinton was still alive, and they were still on 71st, 72nd and Chappelle. They were still over there. And we went over there to sing, and afterwards, we all decided we were going to go to Bennigan's. Downtown Chicago.
Yeah, man, Bennigan's.
So we left 79th and Chappelle and drove downtown to Bennigan's on Michigan Avenue. And then what did we do after we left Bennigan's? We decided we was going to walk around Buckingham Fountain.
Y'all stupid.
So by this time, it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Y'all dumb.
This is before cell phones.
Y'all dumb.
Ain't nobody called home.
You were 15?
I was 15.
Yeah, you deserved everything you had coming to you.
Let me tell you, by the time 4 o'clock in the morning rolls by, it's who was out there? Me, Rodney Alexander, Shauna Jones, Michelle, all of us are out there. It's 4 o'clock in the morning and somebody finally has the good sense to say, maybe we should go home. So, of course, we live in Joliet.
Yeah.
We're at Buckingham Fountain, so by the time I walked in the front door, it was 5:15 in the morning.
You dumb.
But I had went to church, so I was straight, right? I had my church clothes on. I wasn't out sinning. I had a burger at Bennigan's. Daddy was waiting at that front door when I walked in the door, and all I remember is he grabbed a phone receiver and clocked me upside the head and said, "Don't you ever walk in this house at 5 o'clock in the morning and you 15 years old." And you know, mama was in the background egging him on, so she ain't help.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I believe you. I believe.
And as a parent of 3 children, I totally endorse everything that they said to you. Because the thing is, you didn't learn your lesson.
I did.
You didn't, because that same Bennigan's, me, you, JJ, Michelle ended up at downtown Chicago.
Then,
you were older, and I was 15.
Okay.
So clearly,
well, it shouldn't have mattered because y'all was with me.
You missing the point. You're missing the point. You didn't learn the lesson. Because what happened when we left Bennigan's? I remember that night. I can tell you what JJ had to drink that night. That's how crazy. Y'all know my memory.
JJ with that blue Honda Civic.
He had the blue Honda Civic with Ooh J on the license plate. And wow. I remember what JJ drank that night, because I was like, "What's that?" But we got home again.
Thank God for the blood, huh?
So the way our house is set up, our parents, our front door, the only people who had a garage door opener was our parents.
Our parents.
So if you were going to come through the garage, you had to be in one of their cars. Secondly, everybody else came through the front door using our key. Now, we all had keys to the door handle, but we did not have keys to the deadbolt.
Oh, we did not have keys to the deadbolt.
So after curfew,
that's how we got locked out.
My dad would get up. And
he would get up out the bed just to lock the door.
Just to lock the door.
And go back to bed.
And
so if you rang the doorbell, he wasn't getting up to answer.
No. So what we did that night from Bennigan's, and we should have, Bennigan's got us. That's why it's in bankruptcy now. They got a spirit on it.
Yeah.
Man,
spirit of
divination. You put your key in that door, and it was like, man, let's just try and see if Dad forgot to put the deadbolt on. And I remember you turned that lock and you pushed that door, and it didn't go anywhere. So we had to get back in the car, go over to Checkers, the gas station,
and call on the payphone.
Call from the payphone, and Dad answered the phone. Ooh, and we got in the house, and he told your tail up. He didn't get us. He just got
yelled. He just yelled.
Because
I don't think I talked to Daddy for a couple weeks after that.
Yeah, man.
I'm trying to live right in these streets.
I'm starting to think you was the problem, not them.
You are not going to make me the problem.
I'm starting to think you the problem, not
I'm the one that started the choir so everybody could come be saved and live for Jesus.
Okay, so let's talk about, are we talking about...
we're going to get back on this topic. Okay. When you knew that you were called to preach, what did that feel like? Growing up in the house with a preacher for a father.
Torture.
Who you telling?
Torture. I remember, like, I actually just told this story Sunday morning in our ministers meeting. We had associate ministers meeting Sunday morning. And everybody kind of in the circle explained, it was our first meeting with this group. And everybody explained, what their call was like to ministry. And I remember that was December of 1998. On a Sunday morning.
I had just preached your first sermon. 3 or 4 months before that.
Yeah, just preached your first sermon. And I was like, I don't want to hear God. I don't want to hear it. Y'all know, because you call right, that ain't got jack to do with me. And I felt the Lord tugging on me. And I remember December of 1998, I went to Dad on a Sunday morning in tears. He was preparing for church. And I went to him crying. He was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "Dad, man, I think God has called me to preach." And he was like,
Well, typical Edward Barnes.
He said, "Well, you sure?" And I was like, "Dad, yeah." And he was like, "So you gonna say yeah or no?" And I was like, "I don't want to."
I hate them
and
questions.
I was crying. He was like, "Why not?" And I was like, "Man, I don't want to do this." Because at that time I was 16. And I'm 16, and like I'm kicking it. I had a car, you know what I'm saying? Like man, I had my eyes on every young lady that I could imagine.
Mighty God.
Man, listen, I was like, no. But he said to me, "Well, Go back, pray about it. If you can't shake it, come back and see
talk
me.
to me.
and he'll say, if you can get out of it, get out of it. But if you can't get out of it, you know the Lord done called you for real. And I remember
I
that
didn't
was
get that speech.
Oh yeah.
That was a good speech, Daddy.
He said, if you can get out of it.
He didn't give me the option to get out of it. You know what he told me?
No. That wasn't the option. What he was saying is, if you can get out of it, you ain't really been called.
Well,
that's what he was saying.
He said that to me. He said,
if you can walk away from what you're feeling, then you really ain't been called for real. That's what he was saying to me. So
but you got that.
I couldn't shake it. And
ironically, I'm gonna drop a bomb. ACG realistically only got started because I did not want to preach.
Uh-oh.
I knew
So
God
you saying
had
it was a seed of rebellion.
me to preach way back there. And I figured since I don't want to do what the Lord want me to do, I'm gonna run adjacent to his will. I ain't gonna just do it.
That sounds like a Rodney move.
It's a Rodney move. I'm gonna run adjacent to it.
That's a typical Rodney move right there. I ain't gonna fully submit.
Michelle started this community choir that literally became a church for young people in the city of Joliet.
And you've been walking in rebellion ever since. With
We're
all of these anniversaries, ACG anniversaries, all that stuff. God ain't never ordained none of that.
I didn't say he didn't ordain it.
I'm saying
I'm just saying ACG was my response to not wanting to preach.
Well.
But Daddy told me, he said,
it was birthed out of rebellion.
You know, Uncle LJ told me when you was a little boy that I wasn't gonna preach. And I was like, really? Because that was the last thing I wanted to do was preach. I really wanted to sing. I wanted to record. I wanted ACG to go across the country and just be like the next big choir thing. I did not want to preach.
Isn't it, pause, isn't it crazy to think about like that kind of stuff back then? And when you look at the trajectory of not just gospel music, but Christian music and music period, like I believe that when God calls us to do something, well, I'm always baffled by what does not transcend time and space.
Okay.
And what's more cultural than it is God-led. Because a lot of what we did, a lot of the way we, like even the desire to do choir, that's because that was the in thing.
Yeah.
That was culturally what's in.
Yeah.
And I think that when we look at even just how we were raised in church, I think a lot of times there was way more emphasis on what was culturally relevant at that time, not what was eternally beneficial.
Okay.
What was going to transcend space and time. So like there was not a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk about church.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about holiness. There was a lot of talk about like there was this long list of stuff that you could not do. And like we viewed holiness in a very narrow way.
It was
a very narrow way. Like holiness was more so about like dress and demeanor and talk and how you greeted people.
Can't say hello. You got to say praise the Lord.
You got to say praise the Lord. Like you can't say what's up. You like if you dress a certain way, like when you come into church. Remember that you said, hey, you can't wear no short pants at the church.
Short pants.
Do
you know Big Mama? I wore some shorts to Big Mama's church. I don't know what
Big Mama is
our grandmother.
My
mother's mother.
You be happy.
I keep throwing out these names like y'all know. Our Big Mama is our mother's mother. She was. I mean, if holiness was in the dictionary, her picture would be right there.
You walk in her house, she had all of the Kojic bishops lined up on her wall.
Bishop Patterson, Bishop Mason, every bishop that was a bishop. She had them. She had the picture of Bishop Mason at the table with the food stuff hung over her sofa in her living room.
Yeah.
Big Mama let me have it so bad about wearing. She didn't call them shorts. She called them short pants.
Short pantses.
Short pants.
Short pants.
Where did you go down to the church in the short pants? I was like, but again, that it is. But I would say on the other side of that, I think that kind of upbringing gave us a discipline. That when I think about even people in ministry today, people who are raising kids in ministry today, yourself, I think there's a discipline we had that even though God was not necessarily all we did, we were clear that God was a priority. We were clear that church was a priority. And I think to this day, all of us on some way, shape, or form build our lives around that principle because again, it was so foundational when we came up to this is important. This ain't all you got to do, but you will make time to do this. And so now pushing 50, I'm still making time to be in church Sunday. I'm still making time to make sure that my faith is a priority. But I think a lot of that goes back to, just what was put in us as kids and just how we kind of navigated that dynamic of church. And so while I would say there were some things I would change, maybe, I can't say I got any regrets, which I think is a good thing. Like I think we had a good life. I think our parents were supportive. They supported everything we did, both in and out of the church. So I don't think I ever had to compete with the church per se for my parents' attention. I think probably my biggest thing was trying to live up to the reputation that the saints put on us, that the church folks put on us. Like I remember I was courting back then. We ain't gonna tell the whole business. Praise the Lord.
You was courting.
I was courting.
He was courting.
I was dating a little bit. And I was about 19 or 20. And, I had a large family. She had a large family. So there was never an opportunity for any one of us to be alone. So the only time we got to be alone was in the car. So we over on the west side by Movies 8, by the dumpster, kissing all on each other, praise the Lord. And one of the saints saw us because, of course, the young lady I was dating at the time, we was stupid, had personalized license plates, and the Ramadan. She saw the license plate behind the dumpster.
Listen. Hey, old Wendell one got caught in a whole lot of places.
Let me tell you, she pulled me to the side at church the next day, and she was like, young man. She said, I seen your car last night. I'm not going to tell your parents, but, that's not how Christian. This is the kicker with that. Her child hadn't been to church in years at that point, but she was worried about what we were doing.
Yeah.
But I think we accounted a lot of that, like where people had expectation on us that they didn't even have of their own kids. Like their own kids could go and, make mistakes, get arrested, make babies out of wedlock, and we love them, but let one of us do it.
Yeah.
And the world was ending. And so I think there was a period of that. Like when I left St. Paul and joined Progressive.
Provide context. Everybody don't know what that
okay. So St. Paul is the church my father pastored for 36 years before he retired. Progressive, Apostle Donald Alford is the church I ended up at probably at about 22 or 23. And I think one of the major factors that drove me to Progressive was I didn't want to be the pastor's son anymore. There was so much for me pressure behind having to perform. You have to realize everything that was going on. I was in college. I was directing all the choirs at St. Paul, which Dad made sure I was faithful. And like anything that ACG did, I had to do it around St. Paul's schedule. And then on top of that, like I had all this pressure of trying to like be the person that all the young people in St. Paul looked up to. And all of that other stuff. So I was like, I just need a break from being the pastor's son. And so being able to go to Progressive kind of gave me the opportunity to break from the expectations. I thought, not that they were bad expectations, and not that I was living some kind of life that was all wayward from the expectations that I should have.
You were living in holiness.
Here you go.
Go ahead.
But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is like, I think that there is, for every preacher's kid, they kind of experience this type of pressure on some level. So I would guess the question I would ask you is, how do you keep, as a father now, having grown up in that type of house and kind of understanding that pressure, as a father, how do you make sure that your children don't either experience that pressure or don't succumb to
it. This is gonna sound, I don't know if it's gonna sound cynical.
I mean, it is
but
what it is.
Now that I serve as a senior pastor of a traditional Black Baptist church and have for the last 6 years, I think the longer I serve, the less I care. And I almost cussed right there. The less I care. I know y'all gonna see this.
We have arrived.
Y'all know. I told you we gave the disclaimer at the beginning of this. Like y'all know who y'all invited on this thing. So
as Angela Bassett told Lawrence Fishburne, I was wondering when the old Ike Turner was gonna show up.
No, for real. Like I think that the less I care about what people think about my kids.
Okay.
So I don't put that pressure on them. And let me tell you exactly why. The bulk of the people who are at the core of ministry at the church where I serve, they are our parents' age.
Okay.
So I came to a church that was primarily occupied by baby boomers.
Okay.
And a church where I grew up with the kids of the members of the church.
The members of the church.
Because I went to school with all of them.
Right.
Like I mean, I dated. Never mind.
All right.
Never mind.
All right.
I'm like, yeah, I used to come pick your daughter up in high school. but nevertheless, but what I look at is, and this is what freed me, as I looked at how many of their kids still went to church. And very few of them.
I wish I had a bell.
Attended. And just very few of their kids attended and were active in that church or any
other church.
So when I started, because there was always, when I first got there was this kind of a lot of the older members, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, because I was 36 when I started pastoring that church, a lot of them felt like they saw me as their son.
Okay.
So they wanted to parent me. And I had to say very quickly, when I became pastor, oh, whoa. I don't need y'all to parent me. My parents already raised me.
And sitting there watching.
And they're sitting here watching. The reason why you want to parent, and this is what I realized, the reason why you wanted to parent me is because you didn't parent yours.
That's right.
And I started saying, if what you think and the way you think and the way you say ministry should be done and the way you say I'm supposed to act and my children are supposed to act and the people of God are supposed to act, if that was true, then where the hell your kids at?
You said.
I said, where the hell your kids at?
He said it.
I did.
That's the pastor.
But seriously, where are your kids? Because it's my parents raised me, and here's the key. I'm at that time, I'm 36 and I'm pastoring. I applied for this church and preached and taught and casted vision, and you all selected me. So it ain't like
you started pastoring Mount Olive when?
I was 36 years old on my 36th birthday.
You know, Daddy started pastoring St. Paul at 35.
Yep, it was eerily similar.
Very. That's crazy.
So the weird thing is so I started to and I thank God for that freedom.
Yeah.
And it really freed me because I started looking and saying no, my parents raised me. I am who I am because of the way they raised me.
Right.
So you don't get an opportunity to take credit for what my parents have already done by trying to. So when I started asking the questions where y'all kids at? Then folks started backing up. And they started leaving me alone. And when folks started saying stuff looking at my kids and that pressure, and I said, no, where your kids at?
Plus, Daddy's gonna show up, and one thing we can say about our father, he ain't gonna let nobody mess with his kids.
I think in this case, he doesn't have the privilege
Well, that too.
He doesn't have the privilege of,
Plus, he gets the opportunity to go to church every Sunday, enjoy listening to you, and not be responsible for nobody.
He's not responsible for anything. And I'm intentional about, man, letting him come and let him chill. But like, I don't need anybody to defend me. I don't need nobody. Like, at the end of the day, if the way you are telling me I should act, carry myself, do this, do that, how I should regard my children, if that works, why didn't it work for you? And one thing I will tell you about, like, my children love the Lord. My children know their word. Mm-hmm. All 3 of my children have received Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And I personally baptized all my children. None of my kids got saved at church. You know where my 3 kids got saved at?
At the house.
In their bedrooms. All 3 of them. I led Ava to Christ in her bedroom. I led Avery and Austin to Christ at the same time in their bedroom. I sat at the foot of their bed. I shared the gospel of Jesus with them again. And I said, you all remember you were taught this at church and everything. Is there anything that you don't understand? And I asked them, are you all ready to receive Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior? And they were like, they said, yeah. So I think for me, it was just more so about like that undue pressure that people impose upon us. Like once you get free and you stop caring. And then the other point, like I think that even for us, a part of us cared too much.
Oh, absolutely.
A part of us cared too much.
Absolutely.
And think about it. Like I think about it in retrospect, like look at the people who were legalistic when we were growing up
and where they
in
are
church now. And look at where their children are now. So, you know, I don't feel that pressure. Like now that I pastor and I have kids, and I also recognize like all of your kids are different. Like mom and dad raised 5 boys in that house. And all 5 of us, though we may have similarities, we are very different.
Vastly different.
They're not raising the same kids. Yeah. So like they were trying to put all of us in one box because that was easiest. Not even like they didn't have the emotional capacity to know the difference when how I should parent Wendell differently than Nate, and how I should parent Rodney differently from Anthony, and how I should parent Mike different from all of them.
From everybody.
You know what I'm saying? Like they didn't have that emotional.
7 parents, I believe.
So I think I if I had to conclude or just kind of summarize it, I think that the way we were raised and even some of the reservations, regrets, whatever you want to call them about it even now, I don't think they have anything to do with salvation, Christianity, church. I think it all has to do with the emotional capacity of the individuals that raised us. And they raised us to the best of their ability. And
Absolutely. They gave us everything they had.
Everything they had.
Absolutely.
And I think that we just need to stop caring about church.
I think that's a hard trek for any preacher's kid to really. It took a while, and to be honest, I had to get out of St. Paul before I got free. Truth be told, I don't think it would have ever happened there. But final question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up this conversation. One of your kids, Ava, Austin, or Avery, comes to you and says, "Dad, I've been called to preach."
It's gonna be Austin.
What would you say?
First, I'm gonna tell them, I know. Like I know what's in my house, and I tell parents all the time, if you don't know what's in your house, you better find out what's in your house.
Well, then let me change my question. Then, since you say you know, what will you do differently with Austin that you may not do with Ava or Avery?
Nothing. I'm not gonna do anything different. Like I pray over my kids, I speak over their lives, but I give them the freedom. Like they're gonna learn the word of the Lord, because at this point, like they need to learn the word of God.
Okay,
they need to learn like what it means and what it means to be lived out practically. Like I'm not teaching my kids church culture.
Okay.
Because even when you talk about the call to preach, biblically, there is no call to preach. When you look in the Bible, you look at all of the calls, God never called anybody to preach. He called people to prophesy.
Mm-hmm.
He called folks to speak truth to power. The call to preach is something that we created culturally.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about like the work, so for me, I'm more about like, have you been called to vocational ministry? Do you feel led to bivocational ministry? Like, is this your life's work? Like, I'm very clear on the fact that like this is what the Lord has called me to do.
Okay.
And I may have other business ventures and things of that sort, but I'm crystal clear that like this is my vocation. So for me, it's more so about what does ministry for you? What does the call of God look like specifically for you? And how that's going to be carried out. Because the call to preach don't mean they're going to be serving at church. What if they've been called to the mission field?
Yes.
Or the mission field? Like what if my daughter says to me, Dad, I want to go to Guatemala and do missions work.
Mission work, yeah.
I want to go to Beijing. Like we act like church is the end all be all of everything, and it's not.
So you're saying you don't prepare people to accept the call to preach per se.
I prepare them to advance the kingdom of God.
Gotcha.
That's what the preparation should be. Because if I'm just preparing you to preach as we culturally know it, then you'll be satisfied coming to church, doing a little work, and waiting on your turn to preach, as if that's the totality of the call. But if you have been, like all of us have been called to share the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right.
We're all evangelists, so none of us get out of that. There's different, some of us have a unique calling where we understand scripture in a way, when you talk about the call to teach. Now, there's the call to pastor. Now, if one of my kids told me they've been called to pastor.
Now, what's that look like?
Again, it is pastoring at its minimal form. And I've had this conversation with people recently who have shared with me, I feel called to pastor, but I don't know if I want to do it. And I always say to me, when they start talking about their reservations are connected more to pastoring the way we culturally understand pastoring to be.
in our context.
Right. And the call to pastor is not about getting the church building.
Right.
It's not about a LED screen, a sound system, lights and camera and live stream and graphics. Now, if that's the model of church that you have been called to, then cool, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
But what if one of my kids has been called to walk with a small group of people and do life with them regularly? What if my son has been called to having a worship experience in his home where he invites 10, 15 friends and other couples with kids, and they all come by, they study the word together, they share a meal together, they worship together? Because when you look in the book of Acts, that's what the early church did.
That's how the church grew.
And the text says in the end of Acts chapter 2, and daily,
such as should be saved.
Daily, people were added to the kingdom. And then that same
Absolutely.
thing happens in chapter 3. And then again in chapter 4. Every time that Peter would stand up and proclaim the gospel, people would come in. And they were meeting in the temple and they were meeting in their homes.
Yep.
So I think a lot of times when we talk about church, we're talking about it how we understand it culturally, but we're not talking about how God meant it biblically. And how God ordained it, because you can have all the bells and whistles, the building, the lights, the sound, the praise and worship leader, the band, and still be doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
And still be, so like, I want to train, if my son or my daughter, one of my kids comes to me and says, Dad, I feel the call to pastor, I'm going to say, well, let me train you on how to walk with people.
That's good.
Let me train you on how to do life with people. Yeah. And if a church as we know it is birthed out of that, cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. But if there's a gentleman named Brian Dye. shout out to Brian Dye and Legacy Disciple Conference. They have a conference this year. It's going to be amazing, the Legacy Disciple Conference. But Brian Dye is half white, half Puerto Rican, lives on the west side of Chicago, has always lived on the west side of Chicago. I met Brian Dye back in 2008 when I was a youth pastor at Rock of Ages Baptist Church in Maywood. And he at that time he was a part of Nehemiah Urban Ministries where Jamone Glenn was at before. But man, Brian Dye was the first person that I've ever known to start a house church movement.
Wow.
Where Brian and his wife Heidi, man, shout out to Heidi too, beautiful couple, just a solid brother, man, loves the Lord, loves the word of the Lord, understands the word. And Brian would just like, man, kids from the west side of Chicago, he would just be out there talking to them and ministering to them. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, they would all be at his house on Sunday. He would say, man, come to my crib Sunday with me and my wife, share a meal with us. Let's have a Bible study and let's worship the Lord together. And he was witnessing to people. And it got to the point where like his house was full on a Sunday. So instead of going and getting a building, you know what Brian did? He took one of the couples that was coming to the house.
Started another church in their house.
Started another church in their house. Yep. And the next thing you know, man, they had over 12 house churches meeting on the west side of Chicago in different areas. And you know what they did not have? A mortgage, rent. They had to pay no band. They wasn't paying nobody to run sound, live stream, all that stuff. And daily, people would come to Christ.
Wow.
Through these house churches. Wow. And you mean to tell me that just because such and such got a building and 1,000 people showing up or 5,000 people showing up on Sunday morning, they're more effective pastor than Brian Dye? Absolutely not. And I think that as believers, we just have to broaden our, and I don't even want to say as believers, let me just say this, as African-American Christians, as African-American Pentecostal Christians.
Oh, like, you're going heavy now.
As African-American Protestant Christians.
There we go.
You know, all of those are like, we need to broaden our horizon on what we think ministry is.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like what, like think about it. And if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, you said it. I said, Dad retired. You know, Dad ain't pastoring no more. And what did you say?
He's still pastoring.
You said he's still
in the neighborhood.
You said he's still pastoring. He just pastoring in the neighborhood.
That he is.
Because you don't need a church to pastor.
And there you have it. You know what? We're going to have to get out of here. We are out of time, even though we are not out of conversation. So thank you so much for joining this inaugural episode of the Dear Preacher's Kid podcast. Thank you to my younger brother, Pastor Wendell Martin.
This is real good.
This was fun. So look forward to more episodes in the future. Thank you for joining us. Take care.